So thank you very much for Jeff, Colin, Alex's presentation on sharing with us these innovative initiatives and approaches and ideas of real-world data, real-world evidence, and extrapolations and Bayesian approach to enhance novel clinical trial design in pediatric. My name is Emmy Chang. I'm a Senior Director of Quantitative Science at Integrated Drug Development at Certara. And I would like to introduce my colleagues who will moderate this panel session together with me and our speakers as well. We have Dr. Shapiro. He is the Chief Operating Officer at xCures. We have Dr. Jing Liu. She is Senior Director of Clinical Pharmacology at Pfizer. And we have Dr. Solange Rohou, who gave us a great opening section. She's a Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs and Policy Europe at AstraZeneca. And also I want to mention with Jane, Solange, Jeff, and I, we also support a scientific IQ CPLG Pediatric Working Group. And there are also other public collaboration within this group, but I'm going to let our speakers and moderator to share with you during this session. And without further ado, we are going to start the panel discussion. And we have prepared some questions with each of the speakers, and then we will take a live Q&A afterward. And so I hope you all can see the slides. Maybe the first questions that we will ask is, I know, Jeff, you have mentioned in your talk about the emphasis of the quality of the standard and the process of real-world data, but how can we ensure that we will have the cleaning of the data in a standard way, and how can we get everyone on board to continue this effort?
Great question, Amy. Again, I would say this is a bit of a frontier area for this and other work using real-world data. It's a big driving force from the FDA to move this effort forward and to get feedback from the standpoint of reporting what quality metrics make sense. This is not the first time that anybody has tried to do this, keep in mind. So I think the caliper effort in the past coming out of Canada in a broader sense in pediatrics did an excellent effort in terms of providing a benchmark and a baseline for assessing quality metrics from real world data. And there is an organization, OHDSI, that provides about 2,000 quality metric considerations. So a big part of this effort will be CPATH and using its data collaboration center in conjunction with all the collaborators at INC to run through the quality metrics from the various real world data sources that are contributed as part of that grant.
Yes, Jeff, please continue.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Anyway, I think, again, this will be very transparent. It'll be something that is presented to the entire community, and we look for feedback from both the INC members and FDA in terms of their evaluation.
Thank you, Jeff. And then Jane, do you want to go for the second questions? Jane, you're still on mute.
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. So want me go to the second question or me go to the third question?
Yes, sorry, Mark, you're on the second questions.
You're on mute, Mark.
Yes, with the modern technology.
Double muted. Yeah, I'd like to ask the panelists a question about compassionate use, or in the US, expanded access, and I think elsewhere, managed access. Do you view a role for this type of data in supporting pediatric applications?
Did you want to take that, Mark?
Do you want to start, Colin?
Sure. I think it's an important area, particularly in patients with rare disease. I think that's an important area to address, particularly if there's a structured protocol that's being followed. I do think there's a caveat that you have to accept it with some caveats as you begin to apply that going forward, because the population could be significantly more heterogeneous than what would be in a clinical trial, particularly there's a scenario where I was involved in a clinical trial where a lot of the patients that were in expanded access weren't patients who were eligible for the trial. So expanding on that for further regulatory submissions and additional trials might be more complicated because obviously they weren't eligible for a clinical trial before, and bringing their data into a population that may or may not exactly fit, does pose some problems. Not saying you can totally exclude it, particularly, but knowing that, you have to know those limitations.
Thank you.
I can just add to that, in my past life as a pharmaceutical sponsor, and certainly in academia, compassionate use is something that every sponsor takes very seriously and makes strong efforts to make sure that the data is collected in those situations. I also know that this is something where there's clearly an expectation that this is discussed with regulators, where you get the feedback and create an expectation both for the use of the data and the conditions on which compassionate use is extended.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll turn it over to Jing.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is on the Bayesian approach. Thank you very much, Alex, for a very layman explanation what's a Bayesian approach being used. And in addition to the typical prior we borrow from adult and or older pediatric data to the pediatric or younger pediatric from randomized controlled trials, what other types of data it can be used as a prior for designing pediatric studies, and what are the considerations of the data quality, and how would you consider weighing the different priors in this case? So maybe we can start with Alex, and also the question open to all the panelists.
Well, thanks, Jing. I think this is a very important question indeed, and interesting as well, in light of developments that have taken place, or that should be taking place at least, with real world evidence. So in general, when we plan clinical trials, historical and prior information are taken into account somehow indirectly when we design the study, and especially when we choose the endpoints and justify assumptions around the calculation of a sample size, for example. But Bayesian analyses, they go a bit further. So Bayesian analysis offer an opportunity for using information not only in the design but also in the analysis, and hence the decision-making process then incorporates the prior information as well. So it's often stated that incorporating historical or external evidence increases the chances of providing formal proof of the efficacy of the new drug or the new regimen. However, this comes with a price, because we may be introducing some undetected sources of bias or confounding. So this clarifies that more assumptions have to be made once adult data are used to construct a prior for use in clinical trials. Because one of the things with Bayesian methods is the key is choosing the right prior, because you can get different results using a different prior. So we should aim for precise borrowing of information from external sources, and these external sources can include previous trials, natural history studies, and registries, which all fall into the category of real-world data. And we can use some well-established or well-discussed informative priors that they can improve the efficacy of the trial. When external information is openly borrowed into designs as a Bayesian framework, as we've discussed, I think we should provide a clear rationale for borrowing and the explanation how the prior distribution was formed for this. And in the context of the amount of data or the real world evidence, one extra factor that we need to pay attention to, I think is the quality of the data, as we discussed. And as Jeff and Colin pointed out, it all depends on how useful this data is and how much we can trust it. There is lots of sources where we can get data from. We just have to find that right balance between and methodologies available to combine historical and prospective data in a structured manner, I think. Thank you. Over.
Do any other speakers want to add on?
Thank you, Alex. That was quite, useful. Prior to, looking at the following question, I noticed that there's a comment in the question and answer box, which relates to Health Canada and compassionate use. And of course, Alex, I'd be happy to hear, your insight into this, knowing that from my perspective, I have experience, of compassionate use in Europe, and in particular in France, where indeed, according to a specific protocol, as mentioned by Jeff, we are used, according to the protocol, to generate safety information, which of course could be included later at the time of the marketing authorization application. And we've been discussing quite a lot, with the stakeholders, whether, it could be interesting and useful to also generate additional efficacy data. And always, the remark I was given was, well, it will of course depend on the willingness of the investigator, the HCP, to generate those data and to follow up on the patient. So I'd like to hear from you, Alex, since you have, of course, this experience, as looking at those data as a regulator in Health Canada.
Thanks, Solange, and thanks for the question to whoever asked the question. I think, yes, I think this is an important question, an important aspect, especially when it comes to pediatrics and rare diseases in general. So Health Canada, here at Health Canada, we have different pathways that we can look at assessing the benefit risk of a drug. And so we look at, we have different systems that we can investigate both the efficacy as well as the safety. And when it comes to, for example, rare diseases and pediatrics, we don't necessarily base our decision or our benefit risk assessment only in randomized clinical trials. But we do look at other sources of the data as well, especially now that we're evolving in the sense of real world evidence and produced from real world data. So we are open to these ideas. We have collaborated often with different partners and sponsors. And now, for example, here at Health Canada, we have formed what we call the Office of Pediatrics, which is looking on ways to better or to improve the access of pediatric drugs and rare diseases in Canada. And we will come up with approaches that will make life easier for both the sponsors as well as stakeholders, such as pediatric populations and those in rare diseases. Over, thanks.
Yep.
If we want to move to the next question, so before we get there, I think it's a very inspirational question. Question 5, I do have a question for Jeff regarding the Critical Path Institute. You presented great examples on the real world data application, especially on the platform and application in the International Neonatal Consortium, as well as the Rare Disease Cure Accelerator. So it's very understandable that the real world data themselves probably very sensitive, too sensitive to share with the public. But how about the valuable output from real world data analysis? For example, that's the disease progression models, the summary level lab values and patient baseline characteristics, placebo effects, as well as the population variances you presented. Could this be made available to the public for broader applications so that others don't have to reinvent the wheels?
Yeah, Jing, great question. And again, I think just to remind folks, CPATH is a neutral convener here. We don't have any financial skin in the game. And under the guidance of FDA, we will absolutely share these. The entire International NETO Consortium wouldn't participate in this unless it was shared publicly. So that's all part of the plan. In fact, as we are developing outputs from this grant, they will be shared in real time. And certainly the rare disease platform is up and open for use now. You can gain access, as I invite others to gain access and to use the platform as both a conduit for sharing data and also to share their thoughts on model development. The tools aspect of this is something that we're seeking to expand and really encourage the whole ecosystem to collaborate with. I think one of the things we saw yesterday, we had a webinar with a group called Clinarian that does a lot of work with predictive analytics. We're building an API that allows us to connect these two platforms together so that the tools that they're developing for early prognosis of certain rare diseases can be a part of our platform as well.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Great to hear that's going to be open to the public, at least from the data output.
Yeah.
So that leads to Solange, you have any?
Yes,
Just,
please.
I mean, a quick question, if I may, knowing what you are doing, Jeff, involving the stakeholders, in this work, I'm just wondering whether you've considered as well involving some European regulators, knowing all the work which is done, in Europe with regard to real-world data, the use of this Darwin EU, and also what is being done among all the regulators at the international level through ICMRA. So I'm just wondering whether this is something you've considered.
Yes, Solange, this is entirely a global effort. We presented the platform to EMA as well, so this has been very public. And on the INC, as you know, Mark Turner is a key member of our organization who will make sure that there's no population left behind. And as far as data contributions, we have data coming in from Canada, from Japan, from all over the world. In fact, I'm going to present this for the first time in China in less than a month. So our intentions are for this to be entirely global. It's certainly not something that's going to be confined to any one geographic area. Great question.
It's fantastic, thank you. And of course, we are of course looking forward to hearing more in the next few months, because it's a great endeavor. So you can be definitely congratulated. So all my best wishes.
Thank you.
And with that, I think that we have to conclude this session. And I will take then the opportunity to thank the speakers and also the attendees for their question, and also the colleagues that were together with me moderating this session. Great session. Thank you so much.
Yes, I think Solange, I just got a message. We got extra time to ask a few more questions if we would like to. And then we have a little bit shorter break, but I don't know whether everyone would be up for it, because we do have a few more questions. What do you all think? Still want to have a few more question, because I think there was another live questions that want to ask what's the differentiation of the real data, real world evidence, and also clinical trials as well. I know you all kind of alluded to it, but then I think the audience would quite like maybe each of you have a little bit perspective on that.
I perhaps can start with that on the differences between the real world data and real world evidence. So, and I think FDA has a clear definition on this, which is that so the real world data is whatever data is out there based on observational studies, registries, case control studies, you name it. But the real world evidence is the evidence based on that data. And how you generate that evidence incorporates a number of factors. And as we discussed, one of them is the quality of the data. And how much can we rely on that data to be able to generate robust and reliable evidence? The other aspect is, what are the statistical methods that we have available for us to generate meaningful causal inference? Because with randomized clinical trials, what we do, we can make a direct causal link between the exposure treatment and the outcome. However, this is not always clear with observational studies or real world data because of the presence of different sources of biases and confounding. So there are statistical methods, causal theory, for example, based on propensity scores, marginal structural models, and the list is long as well, in which we can generate a clear and robust real world evidence based on real world data. And the third aspect is what we regulators call is the type 1 error rate, as we've discussed in the talks, in which we want to ensure that we don't wrongly conclude treatment benefits based on real world data, because if you're looking for something, you're going to find something, but whether you found that by chance or not, that's another story. So I think we need to have a clear framework on how to generate that real world evidence in which we need to, and so the solution is simple. We have to specify everything prior ahead of time, so that we're going to look for X treatment benefit in Y population using the Z method. And then we carry on that search and data collection based on using real world data. So the same thing, the concept, I think, and the principles of ICH E9, ICH E10, and all ICHs, I think they still apply with real world evidence based on real world data, but we just need to construct that in more meaningful manner.
Yeah, that's really great, Alex. Nice to hear from a regulator on the perspective. And now I'm going to ask Jeff and Colin on your perspective of like real world data, real world evidence, and clinical trial data. Do you see they can all mix it together with eventually also loads of historical information as well to make a decision?
Well, one of the recent developments that's also in our face right now is the influence of the payer community driving more real-world evidence trials. So this is something that I think provides an opportunity to revisit the endpoints. I think what you see as we move to a more value-based economy is the interest in really looking at clinical performance in a way that it's more meaningful to patients. And this is something that's happened for many years now, with pharmaceutical sponsors having to get input from the payer community to both identify the right patient populations and to consider what would be the baseline assessment of the standard of care. And this creates opportunities for real world data. So I think what's interesting is that now sponsors need to incorporate, either by purchasing for that kind of information or developing relationships with people who have accumulated credible real-world data that could serve as the baseline for assessing the current standard of care. And I also think this is a place where, again, Alex mentioned the credibility of priors. So the potential use of synthetic data or basically machine learning and AI approaches to recapitulate a credible prior around the standard of care that could be used as the backdrop for clinical trial simulations of real-world evidence trial. This is really a frontier area for our field.
Thank you, Jeff.
I don't have a lot to add. I mean, I commend, Jeff and the INC project. I mean, we're involved from a site level perspective in EHR data, but I mean, that can be used almost as an example where they're using control data from sponsors as sort of a real world data source. I think those strategies to me represent sort of the continuum of data, given the diversity of data that's there. When I think about like coming up with a solution or recommendation, that might come out of a data set that looks like that, it's almost like your prior could be set within a high range and a low range, given the types of data that you're looking at or levels of certainty that you might have, rather than just a single point estimate. And I think that and to me, I think cognitively coming to the data with that in mind is a really important concept. It also depends on what question you're asking too. So, one of the things that when I'm working with data, since we work with a lot of different variety of sources, I have to really understand what it's made up of to know the limitations of what I'm doing. And so I think any of these sources, and pooling them or dividing them really needs to take all that into account. I think that industry has a very powerful, unit of data, at its use. And I think that the tools and other things that can be created with are also going to be very powerful. But again, knowing that the population is highly filtered is an important fact of that understanding.
Thank you, Colin.
Jeff, you mentioned, of course, the importance of real-world data as well for the HTA and payers. And recently, I attended a meeting where this was debated by HTA colleagues, where they were discussing the use of real-world data for decision making, and that was quite interesting. And of course, they were asking for being involved, with the regulators in order to be able to discuss together, and in particular to deliver a guideline recommendation, knowing, of course, that the research question may be a bit different, and of course expectations are different as well. And to this effect, there's a question in the box by Andrew Mills, who is asking the following question: how early should payer be engaged during the development program process if real-world data is being collected? Might they help shape the protocol?
My feedback to that is, once you create the first draft of the target product profile, you have a sense for, how your product would potentially fit in the marketplace. I think every pharmaceutical sponsor has a commercial engagement early on that evaluates each of their therapeutic area franchises. So, and the whole field of health economics has been something where it's no longer just organizations such as NICE and others that are doing this research in a vacuum. The pharmaceutical industry collaborates in a very real and meaningful way. So you've got nothing to lose by early engagement. And I think the sooner the better, and that helps refine the target product profile. So it's a win-win situation in my mind.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I support what you were saying, and this is something, I'm used to discuss within my company with the colleagues. It's true that it's earlier the better, knowing that, of course, in Europe, we do have the opportunity to have, in the same discussion, regulators and HTA bodies.
Yeah.
So this is quite, you know, an opportunity that should be, of course, considered. Yeah.
Great. So we have a couple more live questions coming in. Amy, hopefully we still have some time.
Yeah, we have some time, like you and Mark could ask them. I think they're very important question. We definitely do have time.
Yes, maybe I'll kick off one. The question is, I wonder if creative data visualization approaches can be helpful to help patient advocates, parents, other stakeholders, for example, policymakers, funders, investors, sponsors, regulators, etc., to understand the real world data and the clinical study process, and also to understand it in a more accessible ways. As part of the process, inventing the solutions. So it may be related to the question we discussed before, but I think it's more focused on the creative data visualization approach. So any speaker would like to comment?
I mean, in some degree, is sort of being more on the clinical side of things. I think that it's really important just because, you know, as we get more, I'll lean it more towards the patient centricity in my start, but, you know, one of the things I think as we involve patients in decision-making around clinical trials, it's really important for them to weigh in about their comfort level for our actions, right? So coming in and having these big scientific discussions, you know, is good, but I think in the absence of who the drugs and therapies might benefit is a mistake. I think it's essential to them. And also to understand the assumptions and their comfort level of the assumptions that we're making in the scientific methods that we're doing. I mean, I see different people that are patient advocates on the list here, and I'd love to hear them, their thoughts as well. But, you know, I think that that's key. The other thing that you know, is probably a little bit more controversial is that, you know, I think when it comes to laws and legislations across jurisdictions, I think those also bring up other questions about current laws and activities and what things should be encouraged based on that feedback. Because obviously this, you know, our role as drug discovery research people, you know, and whatnot is to try to serve the public health, right? And so I think, you know, hearing that and getting their comfort and feedback is also another tool to understand where there's still needs and areas where there needs to be more attention. I see Jeff is off mute, so I can send it his way.
Thanks, Colin. No, I can address this from the standpoint of what we're doing for our platform. I mean, obviously, advocates as well as patients themselves are part of our stakeholder community, and the evolution of the platform will have customized portals exactly addressing this issue. One of the other benefits to working with the whole ecosystem, though, is that we work already with NORD, with other more patient-centric organizations that are doing some of this, that have can get us direct feedback from this community. It's something that we're going to listen to, pay attention to, and then incorporate this in future evolutions of the platform. I mean, I think you have a backbone there that is going to serve the needs of the community, but eventually this will require more customization, so that exactly what the question maker put in here, that it should be something that's easy, accessible, and makes sense as much as we can, make it an intuitive interface so that people understand what they're doing when they go up there and they feel confident in using it.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I think maybe Mark, we will take the last questions and then we probably then will run out of time.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So there was a question about balancing type 1 and type 2 error, which I think is very important in pediatrics, and it's the reason why we're talking about novel clinical trial designs for this population. When we approach this challenge, we look for ways to bring in or borrow more information, and I think what we heard from the speakers today is that there is a lot of information available to us today that we, might include in our clinical trial analysis without necessarily thinking about studies as wholly freestanding things in pediatrics. And so my question is about how to incorporate, and I think I'm I'm partial to multi-level Bayesian models, but the idea of information or priors at both the patient level rather than just study level information, as well as real world data as a source for things like a disease generative model. So I'd like to ask the panelists if they have any thoughts or ideas about where we're going in the future with these additional sources of data and how we can use them to balance type 1 and type 2 error.
So I can perhaps initiate this and then we can have a discussion. And this is a very good point, maybe a point that deserves careful attention and perhaps even more future discussions. As I mentioned in the talk, though, if we, for extrapolation, we may have a bit of flexibility in the sense on a type 1 error, lowering a bit that rate, because we have already established a treatment benefit in adults, so the chances of false positive findings are lower. So perhaps instead of using a 5%, we maybe use it as a 10%. But that's not always clear either, and especially with other pediatric studies, and especially when you use Bayesian method. So currently, regulators require demonstration of control for type 1 error for both frequentist methods or studies or submissions that use Bayesian design, and the reason for that is that Bayesian, for example, Bayesian adaptive designs can inflate the type 1 error rate through incorporation of interim analysis that allow early stopping for efficacy and do not make adjustment for multiplicity. And that depends a lot on the prior that we use. And that's the thing with the Bayesian methods, because the results will depend on how meaningful is your prior. And there's been a lot of research, for example, demonstrating that one can use, for example, a skeptical prior to decrease the type 1 error because it pulls back the posterior mean if you stop early in efficacy. On the other hand, for example, using an informative prior are always useful in early phase studies where higher alphas are allowed or we can use, but they are not usually used with confirmatory trials since they can lead to increased type 1 error in addition to adjustment if the additional adjustments are not made to the stopping rules. And that's where the arguments between the frequentist approaches and the Bayesian approaches come in. Because from a frequentist perspective, you calculate the probability of the data, not the probability of a known parameter. So the more looks you have to the data, the more opportunities for extreme finding. On the Bayesian approach, on the other hand, you don't calculate the probability of data. You calculate the probability of efficacy. And so repeating analysis should theoretically not impact the probability of efficacy. But because, and Bayesians argue though, they say, well, type 1 error aren't most interesting, or, and there are actually indeed other important type 1 important errors in addition to type 1 errors. And instead of focus on that, why don't we focus, for example, on a posterior probability that the treatment is not effective? And there's been talks and there's been discussions in the past about the p-value itself and how can we, you see, sponsors and regulators and many other researchers spends years and lots of money and lots of resources in designing, conducting studies. And at the end of the day, then we focus on a p-value, and that's not really useful. So there have been discussions around the significance of the p-value itself. So in light of these discussions and with Bayesian methods coming in and with the real world evidence coming in, I think it is about time that we sit down and reevaluate the importance of type 1 error, but still maintaining that rigorous scientific level for new drugs. Currently, for example, for late phase confirmatory trials which seek to change practices, here at Health Canada we call them new drug submissions. So regulators require demonstration of type 1 error, whether the trial is designed using a Bayesian approach or a frequentist approach, but definitely type 1 error and type 2 error, especially for pediatrics and rare disease. I think this deserves further discussion, and hope that helps. Over.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Alex. And I think we are now really up to the time. And then maybe anything final thing the speaker or moderator would like to mention. And then if not, just one highlight. We do see participants that highlight the importance of using virtual reality and kind of teaming up with gaming company. We can follow up on any other questions that cannot be addressed in these sessions on the website later with the speakers. But any final words from anyone?
So Amy, if I can add maybe one, at least for myself, a learning from this section, as well as linking back to the sections from yesterday. It's definitely, very encouraging to learn all these new novel techniques and methodologies, especially for pediatric drug development. But as a newcomer for pediatric program, where should we start, right? People could wonder. So personally, I think perhaps still know what questions we want to address for pediatric development, and then figure out, what are the knowledge gaps are, and before we decide which methodologies approach to use. So that's probably more of a starting point. I just, want to give audience some hints from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right, Jing. So what to do to address, a specific research question, knowing all the tools and methods, at our disposal. So in the end, it's all about the justification and the work to be done, with colleagues having different expertise, as it was said, in the previous session by John Van den Acker. So meaning the need to have together colleagues, clinician, statistician, modelers, and others. So this is key. And of course, knowing that there's also the need to have early dialogue, where appropriate, with the regulators. Thank you.
Just one comment to that is that's, I would say, the biggest area where we come in as an entity, as a public-private partnership, is oftentimes you're coming with a therapeutic team and they come with problems, but they may not even know within a company all the resources they might have or how to apply them. And so a lot of those discussions may be around, strategy, possible things that they could try, and bringing those things to the table. So, for lack of a better word, it takes a village, right? And I think that, expanding sort of the group of people that are those early consults is really important to success.
Yeah, that really aids the communication, isn't it? To outline the key questions and then fit for purpose analysis and identify the right source. So finally, so great. I would like to invite Solange and Mark to close this section before I kind of end to give instruction. So,
please, Mark.
Yeah, so again, Mark, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't have any other questions, but I definitely want to thank all the panelists for great presentations, very interesting stuff. I think I feel like I learned a lot about real world data in this session and enjoyed the discussion of statistics. Really thinking forward to how can we make it easier to do efficacy trials in these small populations. So really, really good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And then just to let everyone know, all the sections we have been discussed for multiple weeks, and really are honored to have all the speakers and panelists and all the audience in here. And thank you very much. So we will take a 5 minutes break and then come back in 5 minutes time. And thank you again.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.